When we start to recognize that feelings and emotions equal energy, we can start to look at two different types of emotions as an example. We look at happiness, which is typically perceived as a positive emotion, and then we can look at sadness, which is typically perceived as a negative emotion. Now, both of these emotions hold a sphere of energy, if you will. So we look at these balls; they're tightly wound spheres of energy, right? And our initial reaction when we feel happiness is typically to lean into it. We lean into a perceived positive emotion. Now, you take sadness, for example, or an emotion that we perceive to be negative, and the typical action is to avoid. Now, when we lean into happiness or we lean into any emotion, regardless of positive or negative, whatever we perceive it to be, when we recognize it just as an energy source, we eliminate that we think it's positive or negative. That energy is going to hold its density. It's going to stay in this tightly wound sphere, and we're going to be able to use it to move forward. Okay, now when we take sadness, for example, or a emotion that we view as negative, and we avoid it, we can assume or recognize that that emotion, that sphere of energy that was there, is now becoming looser and looser. Okay, it's dissipating. It's going in all different directions. And these directions typically lead to other unwanted emotions, and typically they impact other people. So it's gonna, it'll show in forms of regret or shortness with other people. And this is because we're avoiding the emotion itself. Now, what if we were to just eliminate the preconceived notion that either is positive or negative, and we just recognize it as energy? We recognize that whatever we're feeling, any feeling is just an energy source. Okay, now we think about this in terms of optimal performance. And you think about the idea that you show up to the field every day and you might have a different emotion. You're going to have a different emotion. You're going to have different thoughts and feelings. Now, some of those, when we typically, we show up to the field or we show up to the court or whatever it may be, and we recognize that we're happy, we're in a good mood, we recognize these as perceived positive emotions, we lean into it. And typically those are the best days. Now, you're going to show up to the field one day and you might recognize that, man, I'm sad. Like, I'm angry. I'm just not in the right space, is going to be the perceived thought or the subconscious thought when we recognize that we're angry. And then when we avoid it, now it starts to dissipate and we have this loose, fragmented energy source that's going in all different directions. Our focus is taken in all different directions. Now, the key or the thought here would be to sit with the emotion, which is where space is created. Now we're creating space for ourselves, and we're recognizing that each emotion or feeling that we have is an energy source. And when we lean into those, we can utilize sadness just as we can utilize happiness to propel us forward. We're always looking for forward movement. And that can come from both sadness, happiness, or any emotion. When we choose not to label it as positive or negative, but we just sit with the emotion and we recognize, okay, where is this happening in my body? We can then begin to utilize that emotion or feeling to propel us forward and give us forward movement. Now, in my opinion, this starts with the breath. When we utilize the breath in recognizing happiness, sadness, whatever emotion it may be, and we choose not to label it. We're not going to label it as positive and we're not going to label it as negative. We're just going to label it as energy. And we can use that sphere of energy to propel us forward rather than avoidance, and now we get a disgruntled and erratic form of energy. So a thought might be just in the morning that I'm just going to sit with whatever I'm feeling, because then we go into the dream state and how dreams influence the way that we feel when we wake up. It's somewhat out of our control. Yeah, it's within our control to perform actions that lead to forward movement, but at times it's very much out of our control how we're going to wake up and feel. But when we sit with those and recognize them in the early part of the day, we start to create patterns and we start to utilize both in any feeling or emotion as an energy source. And we recognize that in terms of optimal performance, we can use whatever feeling or emotion that we're having to propel us forward.